this week we are doing the top 10 catchers in baseball. And yeah, just for reference, um, we break down what we think they will do for 2025. It's not necessarily a review of what they have done, but what we think they will do. And, we will use what they have done in order to provide context to what we think they will be able to do. But because that's very important. But, I think there's somewhat more of a value on youth and underlying numbers like expected numbers and stuff like that.
Defense
Um,
especially.
yeah, average exit velocity, strikeout rate, walk rate, all that stuff. So yeah, with that context, who is your number 10 catcher for 2025?
Yeah, I'd like to start by saying this was a very difficult list to put together for me. I don't know what your experience was like, but I was considering seven different guys for my 8 through 10 spots.
Yeah, my number 10 was very hard to fill out for me.
For my 8 through 10 was very, it took me like an hour to come to a final conclusion.
Hmm.
Um, but for number 10, I have one of the seven returners that I have on this list. He was number six for me last year, has fallen to number 10, but consider the amount of competition he was with, he did stay on the list. I'm talking about Will Smith from the Los Angeles Dodgers. In earlier years, he probably would have been top three at the very least. Six for me last year. I was a little bit more down on him than some. And this last year, he did regress a bit on offense and didn't show us a ton on defense. But regardless, I still think he's a top 10 catcher in the game heading into next year. He is very good on many of the hitting fronts, right? I mean, he first of all, I love his fly ball rate. He had a 40% fly ball rate last year, and he also became just the second player since 2008, which this is on Baseball Savant, so essentially since the start of baseball history, according to Baseball Savant, to have multiple seasons with 300 plus batted balls and a 40% fly ball rate. Only him and Alfonso Soriano have done that since 2008. So I like that Will Smith plays obviously in a hitter friendly ballpark. I like that he puts up that kind of crazy fly ball rate. It led him to 20 home runs last year. I think he's capable of more. But on top of that, he had a good sweet spot rate last year. Was at 38%. Didn't strike out a lot. Walked a decent amount. Hit the ball. Continued to be a very good offensive catcher. Clearly a catcher where offense is his biggest strong suit. He wasn't quite there defensively. He was actually the worst framer in the league, according to StatCast, or at least first percentile. Not very good at blocking either, but he does have a very good throwing arm. That is definitely a plus for him defensively. Um, there is, obviously the offense kept him here. He's been one of the most consistent offensive hitters, even if the total production has gone down a bit over the years, but it's still enough for him to stay in the top 10 for me. So I have Will Smith. He was my number six last year. He's my number 10 this year.
Yeah, he's Will Smith is kind of a weird thing because he had so much potential. Obviously, he displayed a lot of potential back in like 2020, 2021. We figured he would be maybe the standard for catchers, and he hasn't been bad, obviously. It's just not necessarily um up to, the top echelon of catchers like we potentially expected. Um and we interrupt this segment a little bit because I made a bit of mistake that I didn't realize until I revealed my uh number 9 catcher in baseball. Uh I mistakenly originally had Wilson Contreras in my list, and I totally missed that he is moving to first base this upcoming year. I just When I saw on the Fangraphs projected roster that he was going to be at first base, I just assumed it was kind of a an error, and they were going to have that other catcher, Ivan Herrera, um, kind of like in and out of the catcher position, while William Contreras would kind of platoon and stay mostly at catcher. But apparently, yeah, he's not going to be a catcher, so he is not in either of our lists. But I originally had him in the list, which kind of messed up the order of things. Um, so yeah, so uh, I originally had my number 9, or my number 9 is my number 10, and my number 8 is my number 9. So my number 11 was not in this list, but I will talk about who now in my updated list is my number 10, and that is Gabriel Moreno, um, yeah, he has been consistently above average offensively and defensively for his whole career, which has been a 3-year career. And that is exemplified by him having at least a 103 OPS plus and +3 defensive run value every year that he has been in the league. And then on the underlying side of things, his expected WOBA has increased every year of his career. And he had amazing strikeout and walk numbers last year. He and Mookie Betts were the only players last year to be 90th percentile or higher in both strikeout and walk rate. So pretty unbelievable in that respect, and shows that there's some good offensive upside along with his already pretty established very good defense. So yeah, kind of sneaking in. Also should be mentioned that he is only going into his age 25 season, so youth definitely on his side, and there's definitely room for him to flourish even a little bit more. So yeah, Gabriel Moreno is my number 10. And yeah, just because my list was wrong, um, you know, I I tried to make some edits in and make things make a little bit more sense, but who ended up being my number 9 maybe references my number 10, and who ended up being my number 8 maybe references my number 9. But yeah, trying to make it as the least amount of confusion possible. But in my updated list, Gabriel Moreno gets number 10. Who is your number 9?
Yeah, number nine, I have a newcomer to the list. I talk all the time about how if there's a great defensive player, I say things like, oh, he only needs to be average offensively. And I say that, sometimes in hypothetical sense, but Gabriel Moreno has kind of been that in the 3 years that we've seen him as a catcher. We haven't quite seen him play a full season yet, but I'm still very excited to see what that could look like if he stays healthy. He's put up a 730 OPS or higher in each of the 3 seasons that he's appeared in the majors so far, which is exactly what I mean when I say if he can just be an average offensive hitter, the defense will make him a very solid option. And not to mention, he also happens to be a very good base. Only qualifying catcher in 2024 to put up an above average batting run value, base running run value, and fielding run value in 2024. So he definitely has a bit of a diverse skill set. The defense is very strong. He's a good framer. He also has a very good throwing arm. He's been consistently on top of the pop time leaderboards in the time that he's been a catcher. Additionally, the strikeout and walk numbers are very solid. He has 90th percentile chase rate, K rate, and walk rate, while also maintaining in the top 20% in whiff rate as well. The results have been a little average. The batted ball distribution isn't exactly my favorite, but there are improvements being made. He had a 55% ground ball rate in 2023. It went down below 50% in 2024. He had a 16% fly ball rate. It went up to 21%. It's still not where exactly I'd like to say that he provides. I think that's enough for me to justify having a lot of optimism for him going into 2025. Like I said, we still haven't really seen a full season out of him. I'm hoping that we can see that this year, at least like, I don't know, enough to qualify for the batting title. I'd very interested to see what he could do in 500, in 2 plate appearances of work. I could see him as a 3 to 4 win catcher potentially, and I'm putting him at number 9 on my list. So Gabby Moreno is making the cut for me.
Right, right. At my number 9, I've got Alejandro Kirk. Alejandro Kirk is heading into his age 26 season, and although he hasn't progressed like we thought he would after 2022, he is still ninth among catchers in F4 over the last 2 years. And this is largely because he has the third highest defensive runs above average among catchers, while sustaining fairly average offense. I think he has a 95 or somewhere in the mid 90s for weighted runs created plus over the last 2 years. And catcher isn't necessarily the most offensively dominant position. Um, so So yeah, and also there's some encouraging things under the surface with him. He increased his average exit velocity by 1.8 miles per hour from 2023 to 2024, and also had 58th percentile expected WOBA, which isn't, it's not the craziest brag, but he was above average in terms of the expected stats that considered, strikeout rate, walk rate, quality of contact, and all that. And it shows that he has the potential to be an above average hitter while also being one of the best defensive catchers in baseball. And part of the reason why he wasn't necessarily at the top of his offensive game last year was he was the 14th unluckiest out of 261 in WOBA and expected WOBA. So I expect some of those underlying things to take shape and create some good offensive results while also maintaining that consistent defense that we've seen out of him. I think, not only has he been um not only has he had, a great showcase of fielding, but it's been, I feel like, every year since he's gotten consistent playing time behind the plate. Yeah, if you look at the past 3 years, and his catching run value, it's plus 12 in 2022, plus 8 in 2023, plus 14 in 2024. So that's been consistent. He showed that he could be a great offensive player in 2022. Hasn't been quite the same the past 2 years, but I think has shown the potential to at least be above average at the plate. Who do you have at number 8?
Yeah, so at number 8, I actually have your number 10. I also put Alejandro Kirk on my list because the defense was too good to ignore for me, and I remain optimistic that he can improve to some degree, at least on offense. Yeah, like you mentioned, 20 defensive runs above average last year, 37.8 over the last 2 years, and doing some quick math here, 48 points, 49% or 49 defensive runs above average over the last 3 years. One of the best defensive catches that we've seen on a pretty consistent basis now. And I think last year was kind of the tale of two different seasons for him. Just to give you an idea, from March through June, he struggled offensively. I believe finished the month of June with a 597, or excuse me, a 587 OPS on the season. That came with a 225 BABIP. And if you know Alejandro Kirk, you know that he keeps the ball on the ground, is a line drive hitter, doesn't really hit a ton of fly balls, which obviously you don't want him hitting ground balls either. But regardless, from March through June, Kirk was the 15th unluckiest hitter by expected batting average and the 23rd unluckiest hitter by expected slugging among the 300 hitters with at least 150 plate appearances. And a lot changed after that because from July 1st through the end of the season, he slashed 282, 338, 397 for a 735 OPS and a 308 BABIP. That's kind of exactly who we want Alejandro Kirk to be offensively. That's kind of exactly what he has to be maybe even, rise on this list for both of us, with the defense being as good as it is. And you touched on the defense earlier, so I won't go too deep into it. But in terms of what changed, from March through June, 15% of the fly balls and line drives that Alejandro Kirk hit were pulled, and that number rose to 25% from July to September. So we went from 15% of fly balls and line drives pulled to 25% between the first 3 months of the season to the last 3 months. He went from hitting 388 and slugging 592 on these fly balls and line drives to hitting 500 and slugging 789 on them in between this time. So he definitely showed some offensive regression throughout the season last year. If he can be a little closer to that July through September version of himself offensively, I think he can have a really solid season, coupling that with the defense. And for me, it was good enough to make the list, and I have him at number 8.
At my number 8, I have Will Smith. He was my number 5 last year. And yeah, like he's been good, but yeah, he's been good but not great necessarily. Um he's heading into his age 30 season, so he's actually kind of one of the older players maybe on this list. And he ranked 10th among catchers in 2024 in FWAR and ranked 6th in 2023. He's had a 116 OPS plus each of the past 2 years, and he tied a career low in fielding run value this past year. So that unfortunately trended in the wrong direction. Could be an outlier, but It was, he's never necessarily been a dominant defensive catcher in terms of accumulating run value and things like that. But it was the worst it's been um, in a while for him on the defensive side of the ball, and he was not necessarily um, dominant on the offensive side of the ball either. He had a 116 OPS plus, which is good enough to get on this list, but not necessarily be among the top. So yeah, he's still a very productive catcher, and um, I think will continue to be a top 10 catcher in baseball this year. But definitely, not I don't consider him in the same echelon as I would have probably a few years ago. What is your number seven?
At number seven, I actually have this same guy at my number seven from last year. I think the exact same of him this year as I did last year. No, not really, but I have Francisco Alvarez remaining in my seventh spot. Obviously, wasn't exactly the season I was hoping for, but I think the potential sort of remains. He did get injured last year. Some of his offensive numbers, at least the batted ball metrics, took a bit of a hit. He declined in stuff like barrel rate and average exit velocity and sweet spot rate and various other things. But, I still think the potential that he has, coupled with defense, is very good. Talking more specifically about the defense, he's been one of the better framers in the league since he's been in the league, and it continued last year with 7 framing runs despite missing a month and a half. And he ranked on Fangraphs specifically. He ranked 24th in innings caught, 9th in framing on Fangraphs, 10th on Baseball Savant. So he jumped up a bunch of other catchers in framing that played a lot more than him last year. Obviously, that's something that you accumulate. But the power numbers I believe are still there. The potential is still there. I don't love that he upped his ground ball rate by 6% last year and dropped his fly ball rate by 11%. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I'm willing to chalk that up to whatever the injury was. He did he was hitting the ball a lot better as the season went on last year. So I really feel like after he came back from the injury last year, he was probably still not his 100% best self. Just to give you an idea, the average exit velocity specifically, it was 84. It was 84 miles an hour and 86 miles an hour in July and August, and then 92 miles an hour in September. So I do think we have a good chance of seeing the old Francisco Alvarez come back, offensively speaking, while remaining the same on defense. And I'm keeping him in my number 7 spot for that reason.
Yeah. At my number seven, I have someone who was on my list and is rising up the list. Another young catcher. It is Yainer Diaz, who was my number 10 last year, opened up my list last year. And yeah, just kind of kept things somewhat similar to what he did the year before, except did it in a greater sample size um, and just kind of prove that he is here to stay and here to keep producing. He's only heading into his age 26 season, and he ranks seventh among catchers in F4 over the last 2 years. So it kind of makes sense that he is number seven. Out of 38 catchers with 500 plus plate appearances over the last 2 years, Diaz has the second highest OPS among the current catchers and the highest slugging among them as well. Um, Also, his expected numbers have been 75th percentile or higher each of the last 2 years. So his offensive upside is there for sure. His general offensive production did go slightly down, but it was still very good. Had a 118 OPS plus last year, and also is not necessarily a detriment as a defensive catcher as well. So yeah, he's very productive at the plate. The underlying metrics prove that he should be very productive at the plate. And he's also still got, some good youth on his side. So I believe he is the number seven catcher in baseball. Who do you have at number six?
Yeah, at number 6, I have my third and final newcomer to the list. I'm talking about Austin Wells from the New York Yankees. I'm putting him in my number 6 spot. He, again, he was in the end had an average offensive season, but a phenomenal defensive season. But even that came after a bit of a slump to end the season. He was rocking kind of like a high 700s, low 800s OPS for a while there. and was atop some of the F4 leaderboards over certain spans. In the end, he finished with 3.4 Fangraphs wins above replacement in just 115 games in his rookie season. So, I thought that was pretty cool. Love that he did that. And Some of the walk rate was very good, 11.4% on the walk rate. I like that a lot. Talking more specifically, though, about the defense, he ranks third among all catchers in framing runs with 12 on Baseball Savant. He ranks 13th among all players and fourth among catchers in fielding run value. He was in the 96th percentile for that. The defense was just phenomenal. The barrel rate was also very good. It was 9.1%. The expected WOBA was at 339. So those were above average. There's certainly a lot of potential there for the offense, but the defense is just magnificent. And another guy, I mentioned this with Alejandro Kirk, but the pulled fly ball rate, the percent of fly balls pulled went up throughout the season. It was 12.5% from March through May, 33.3% from June through July, and 40.6% from August through September. And the exit velocity wasn't quite there in August through September, which is why you didn't see the results, but the timing was there. I do believe that Austin Wells can put together a really nice full season with this fantastic defense. And then obviously the offense, I think, has a chance to improve itself. Some of the underlying things I think definitely did throughout the course of this season. So I'm putting him in my number 6 spot to debut on the list.
Right, right. Yeah. I'm gonna match you with that because I have Austin Wells at
Mm-hmm.
number 6 as well. Yeah, he was very impressive, especially at certain points throughout the year last year. Ended up being a Rookie of the Year finalist. So good on him for that. And yeah, he was another newcomer to my list. He is heading into his age 25 season. Obviously, with him being a rookie last year, has youth on his side, and yeah, he finished fourth in F4 among catchers last year, and that is despite having the 15th most plate appearances. So usually there's a correlation between playing time and how much wins above replacement you accumulate. So the fact that he was able to be top four despite not having a crazy amount of playing time, that shows that his season was very impressive last year. And yeah, a lot of that had to do with his defense. He put up plus 13 StatCast defensive run value and also had a 103 OPS plus at the plate. So yeah, it's a good recipe for success. Just holding your weight on the offensive side while also being an excellent defender. That's what a lot of these catchers kind of do on this list. And yeah, he was 60th percentile or higher in expected WOBA, expected slugging, barrel rate, bat speed, chase rate, and walk rate. He did underperform his expected numbers a little bit, so there is hope that there is potential for him to produce a good amount more offensively, which brings him up this list a little bit more as well. So yeah, there's a lot of potential with Austin Wells, or at least he displayed that this past year, and especially with him heading into his age 25 season, there's a lot of possibilities for him. So yeah, he's number 6 on this list. Who do you have at number 5?
At number 5, I put the guy that I put at the top of this list last year, my number 1 catcher of 2024, is now my number 25 in 2025. I'm talking about Sean Murphy. It was a rough 2024 for Sean Murphy, one that he certainly wants to forget. Not only did he spend a lot of the year on the injured list, but when he was on the field before and after the injury, he just wasn't himself, quite simply. There's a lot of different things you can point to in terms of what went wrong, whether it be just the offense in general. He took a major dip in ISO. Strikeout rate went up. Walk rate went slightly down. The BABIP went quite far down as well. And then in terms of all this the Statcast stuff, he lost 3.5 miles per hour in average exit velocity. He lost 13% in sweet spot rate. He gained 12% in ground ball rate, and lost 12% in line drive rate. So you might ask yourself, why is he still number 5 on this list? Well, I think the potential is still there. The defense was still there to a certain degree last year. And additionally, I do think there was some misfortune. Sean Murphy was the 12th unluckiest hitter by expected batting average and the 6th luckiest in expected slugging against four-seam fastballs among the 400 hitters with at least 50 plate appearances ending on four-seamers. He slugged 952 on hard hit four-seamers, but had a 1401 expected slugging, making him the third unluckiest hitter. So I do think there is some room for a comeback offensively for Sean Murphy. I think that a lot of those crazy, decreases or increases in all those stats that I mentioned are probably going to neutralize themselves in 2025. I think the sweet spot rate will go back up. I think the average exit velocity will go back up. I think the line drive rate will go back up. The ground ball rate will go back down. The pull rate's still very good. He pulled over 50% of his batted balls last year and had over a 30% rate of fly balls that were pulled. Like I mentioned, the defense is still there as well. And, there was just a weird injury bug going on with the Braves all of last year. I would imagine that probably won't carry to the same degree into 2025. So I'm keeping Sean Murphy on this list and I'm keeping him in my top five.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, and once again we have the same guy at number well, we have the same guy at number 5, the same way we did at number 6. Yeah, Sean Murphy, he was my number 2 catcher last year. And yeah, he is coming off a big down year. Right now he's heading into his age 30 season, and he just came off a year where he only played 72 games, and he suffered career lows in average on base percentage, slugging, OPS, OPS plus, and average exit velocity, along with all expected categories. And his OPS plus went from 127 to 76 because of all that, from 2023 to 2024. However, despite that, crazy down year, he still ranks sixth in F4 among catchers over the last 2 years, just because of how great he was in 2023. So yeah, he's most likely not that version of himself in 2024. And considering the injuries that may have played a factor in his lack of production last year, I still have to bring him down the list because of last year did happen. But still, I still am optimistic about his potential for next year. He, as you mentioned, he had a little bit of lack of luck in the batting department as well. So yeah, I think in a healthy 2025, he can be, a pretty productive catcher still this upcoming year. And, I could see potential for him just kind of getting back to that previous form that, we were considering him a top 2, potentially best catcher in baseball. Who do you have at number 4?
At number four, I have a guy that was my number 8 last year and is still number 1 in my heart. I'm talking about Patrick Bailey, who is, the gold standard for catcher defense in today's game. Uh, yeah, what number 4? I thought putting him at number 8 last year was like I'm being bold with this one. Number 4 this year, I think, is weirdly appropriate when you're considering offense and defense appropriately. Patrick Bailey is the best defensive catcher in the game. There is no debate over that. He has 62 defensive runs above average in the 1.5 years, the 218 games that he has played in the major leagues so far. He is one of just 18 catchers dating all the way back to 2002 with 30 defensive runs saved and 40 framing runs on Fangraphs. Again, one of 18 catchers in the last 22 years, 23 years, and it took him a year and a half to get on that list. He has the fewest innings caught among those 18 catchers by nearly 1,300 innings, equivalent to 144 games. Patrick Bailey is, quite the defensive catcher, and amazingly, he doesn't even need to be an average offensive hitter because he has not been. He has a career 79 weighted runs created plus. He was at 81 last year. I hope to hear his name called by you a little bit later. He had 4.3 Fangraphs wins above replacement last year, despite an 81 weighted runs created plus. It obviously takes a masterful defensive performance to do that. But I actually do think the offense could still be there, and it was there for a large part of last season. He was around the 100 weighted runs created plus mark for the first half of the season, and he had a 30% line drive rate last year. But he went through a major slump in the month of August where he hit like 040. And the expected numbers were obviously better than that, but that slump did happen, and thus honestly it probably did cost him a couple spots on my list because of it. But regardless, I have Patrick Bailey in my 4th spot. I think with an average offensive season, he could even rise on this list, but right now I'm going to have to go ahead and assume the offense is going to stay the same, but the defense is just too good to ignore. He is my number four.
Right, right. Yeah. My number four is who I put as the top catcher in baseball last year. It is Adley Rutschman, who is heading into his age 27 season. And yeah, I'm surprised, if you told me this is where I'd be putting him in 2025, I'd be surprised. But yeah, he progressed in the wrong direction the past year. From 2023 to 2024. His OPS plus went from 128 to 107. His defensive run value on StatCast went from +8 to 0. And his expected WOBA went from the 93rd percentile to the 47th percentile. So yeah, I mean, just in general, I'm kind of relying on his upside because he did not have a top five catcher season last year. But I have him in the top four here. It's just, considering what he's done, what he did in his rookie season and the year after, I have to consider that upside and what he brings to the table. And I do believe that he will improve from 2024 to 2025. But his unfortunate season and his general regression in kind of all areas last year, made me, bring him down this list. But yeah, he has youth and he has talent on his side. Just kind of needs to show what he can do in order to rise back up the list. But yeah, I'm still pretty confident in him. He's still at the number four spot, but I'm definitely not as confident in him as I was last year. Who do you have at number three?
Yeah, number three. This is where I put Adley Rutschman. So we're back to back segments on him. I had him in my number two spot last year, so he is only falling one spot for me. Um, I don't know. I do think that he can get back to what he was, which is a five-win catcher. The defense did go down, the offense went down, pretty much everything went down for him, but a lot of the peripherals, in some ways, stayed the same. His strikeout rate he only went up by 1.4%, not a meaningful enough number to cause any sort of concern. The walk rate did go down by a considerable amount, but like average exit velocity, he stayed the same. Distribution of power, he stayed the same. Percent of fly balls pulled, he was roughly. He actually decreased quite considerably in ground ball rate and in increased in fly ball rate, which I think is pretty cool. And he increased in pull rate too. So there's a lot of metrics that I think could indicate he finds himself a little bit more in 2025 if things stay the same. I tried to look if there was any sort of injury that he was playing through or any just sort of underlying reason why this slump was happening. Mike Elias said it was just general fatigue from playing catcher every day. So maybe they'll have him DH more. Maybe put James McCann back there a little bit more in 2025. But regardless, I think Adley will find his way back to at least being closer to what he was. I don't think he's going to be a low 700s OPS guy again because all of it really happened in the last half of the season, right? Like he had an 830 OPS, I believe it was, going into the month of July. And everything just kind of fell apart those last few months of the season. And I think he's going to be closer to what we know about him in 2025. So he is remaining in my number three spot.
Right, right. Yeah. My number three is your number four. It is Patrick Bailey, who I had at number nine in 20 for the 2024 season. And yeah, Patrick Bailey, definitely has youth on his side. He's heading into his age 26 season. He finished third in F4 among catchers in 2024, and he ranks fourth among them over the last 2 years. And he led all fielders in StatCast, all fielders, no matter position, in StatCast fielding run value by 5 runs last year. It was 22. He had 22. The next most was 17. And over the last 2 years, he leads all fielders in defensive runs above average by 22.6. I mean, that is a crazy significant number. So, in terms of, fielding run value and defensive value, it's Patrick Bailey and it's everyone else. So, there's that factor. That's what brings him up the list so much. And I think why I may have him higher than you do is because I do believe that there is a lot of merit in those expected numbers being above
Mm-hmm.
his actual numbers, and I do think he will have a significant offensive improvement this upcoming year. Because yeah, although he only has an 81 OPS plus over the last 2 years, he has the unluckiest difference in WOBA and expected WOBA out of 255 hitters. So I do believe in that theory that, he will be kind of an average bat, while being, overwhelmingly the best defensive player in, not only among catchers, but among all players in baseball. So yeah, I guess it's a high standard to have him in, considering that, I think he will keep being the best fielder in baseball. But, I think he will improve that offense, and that will form him into a top three catcher in baseball. So yeah, who do you have at number two?
Excellent. My number two is a guy that I had in my number five spot last year. That I was a bit skeptical of, and he went out and proved me completely wrong. And it's William Contreras from the Milwaukee Brewers. I was skeptical of him last year because of his high ground ball rate and high BABIP on ground balls. I didn't think that was going to be sustainable, and it was. He had a 54% ground ball rate last year. I believe hit like a little under 300 on ground balls, if I remember correctly. And still be one of the best offensive catchers in the game. Had a 131 weighted runs created plus. Defense did regress a little bit, but he was still very strong behind the plate. Finished with a 5.4 wins above replacement, tied for the most at the position. Um, I think the one thing I know I talked about the ground balls being a reason that I was critical of him previously. I still do think it probably kept me from putting him at number one. Because when he doesn't hit ground balls, he is awesome. He averaged 98 miles per hour on his line drives and fly balls in 2024, the sixth highest among the 179 hitters with at least 150 line drives and fly balls. And if you take a look at that list, the only hitters above him in average exit velocity were like Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Juan Soto, O'Neill Cruz, and Kyle Schwarber. I believe those were the five. And William Contreras came in at number six. So, I mean, we're talking about a premier power hitter. He doesn't quite hit for power as much as I would like him to, but when he is lifting the ball, there are very few that does do it as well as he does. 92.8 mile per hour average exit velocity, a 10% barrel rate per batted ball. Um, yeah, there's a lot to like in the power numbers. Obviously, he doesn't pull it a ton, but regardless, it's still he's the power numbers are still good enough to where he doesn't really need to. He can, in fact, a lot of his home runs were to center field last year. So I'm putting William Contreras in my number two spot, but very open to putting him at number one next year if he can figure out those batted ball metrics a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. My number two is also William Contreras. He was my number four last year, and I shared a little bit of that skepticism as well, or at least just being able to consistently put it into place because he did lead all catchers in F4 in 2023. It just kind of happened sort of out of the blue, and he did it again. He actually led an F4 again last year. But yeah, so he's led all catchers in F4 each of the last 2 years. He also um he has the highest OPS among the current catchers with 500 plus plate appearances over the last 2 seasons, and also has +7 defensive run value over the last 2 years. Although that did, the +7 is +8 in 2023 and -1 in 2024. So if you weighted it down, it probably wouldn't be as impressive. However, you still have to recognize that he did have he is 2 years removed from a very good defensive season as well, to go along with his offense. Part of what made his offense a little bit more sustainable this past year was his average exit velocity increased by 1.5 miles per hour from 2023 to 2024, which helped him be 90th percentile, or it was above 90th percentile in expected WOBA, or is exactly 90th percentile in expected WOBA. But he was 90th percentile or higher in expected WOBA, average exit velocity, and walk rate. So those are all three very, good underlying metrics that show that he can probably sustain some offensive success in the future. But yeah, in with my number one, and I'll get into my number one, I do believe there's more untapped things that there's more things that, more things went William Contreras' way last year than the number one guy, and the number one
Mm.
guy had about as good a season as William Contreras. So yeah, without further ado, who is your number one catcher in baseball for
Yeah, I mean, it
2025?
sounds like for the first time this year, we will actually be agreeing on a number one. We weren't there on first base, we weren't there on center field, but we are both talking about Jacob Stallings for our catcher list. I mean, what a season he had for the Colorado Rockies. Very,
Yeah.
very exciting stuff. No, we're talking about Cal Raleigh, obviously. Um, he was, I think, both of our number threes last year, and I would have to imagine he's both of our number ones this year. So we're pretty locked in when it comes to talking about Cal Raleigh. Um, yeah, I mean, he's kind of the perfect combination of what we want to see out of him offensively and what we want to see out of him defensively. He is among the best defensive catchers in the game. He had 21.8 defensive runs above average last year. He had 98th percentile framing, I believe, was second in baseball. Um, and yeah, just overall was a very solid catcher. I love his batted ball distribution. He's kind of exactly what he's supposed to be for a guy that uh, comes in at 6'3", 235 pounds as a catcher. If you had to ask a guy like that, what do you want him to be offensively? You'd say, I want him to have more fly balls than ground balls. And that's exactly what he has, a 36% ground ball rate last year to go along with a 45.5% pull rate, which is just awesome. To get more into that, among the 170 hitters with at least 300 batted balls in 2024, Cal Raleigh ranked third in fly ball rate, tied for second in pulled fly ball rate at 14.4%, and eighth in barrel rate at a 15.4%. And also among the 100 hitters with at least 100 fly balls, he ranks 10th in percent of fly balls that were pulled at 39.4%. He is like he does everything so perfectly. Obviously, the strikeout rate you'd want to be lower, but that's a little too much to ask sometimes, given the state of the game right now. But he hits the ball very hard. He hits it in the air. He pulls it. He does. He also has a high sweet spot rate. Despite that, he walks a lot. He does pretty much anything that you could possibly ask him to do, and he is my number one catcher in baseball.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he is Cal Raleigh is also my number one catcher in baseball. Um, because yeah, he's heading into his age 28 season. He does have the second most F4 among catchers over the last 2 years. And a lot of that has to do with his defensive value that, you just talked about. He has the third highest defensive runs above average among all fielders over the last 2 years, not just among catchers, but all fielders. And, this past year, he put up career highs in all expected numbers and average exit velocity. And he also put up, as you mentioned, the 10th highest rate of fly balls being pulled out of 101 hitters. So I think my logic with Cal Raleigh being above William Contreras is, for whatever reason, his expected numbers were, or his WOBA trailed his expected WOBA by 23 points last year, but his pulled fly ball rate stayed very, very good. And usually, um, oftentimes, uh, you know, lack of luck, at least in the expected number spectrum, can be explained by, not pulling fly balls or hitting fly balls to wrong areas of the ballpark because StatCast does not, expected numbers do not factor what part of the park you're hitting your fly balls. But he is pulling, still a great number of fly balls. So I imagine that the difference in actual numbers and expected numbers can be just explained by bad luck. I think that's what it was. So if that's the case, then I expect him to have even better offensive numbers last year while maintaining great status as a defensive catcher. The guy also, not to mention, we don't mention awards that much, but he won the Platinum Glove last year. So
Yeah,
not only do we think he's a great defender and do the numbers think he's a great defender, but the voters do as well. So and yeah, he rightfully earned that platinum glove. He's one of the most defensively valuable players in baseball, while also being pretty offensively valuable as well. I mean, if I think his OPS plus was above 110, which, for the catcher position is, very, very good. It might as well be in the 120s when you're a catcher. Yeah, he was at 119 OPS plus last year, 114 the year before, 122 the year before that. So he's been very consistently, comfortably above average as an offensive player while being one of the best defenders in baseball. And there's potential that he can do even more offensively, considering some of the improvements that he made last year. So yeah, I'm excited about Cal Raleigh's potential. Shout out to us, yeah, last year having him at number 3 and MLB Network having him at number 9, which was a shame. They must be,
Yeah, shout out to us for being right on that one.
yeah, it must be they look too much into like B War instead of F War.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, it was a problem.
they play at Will Smith like number 3 then.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, so yeah, without further ado, let's to do our 10 through 1.
Yeah, so at number 10, I have Will Smith. Number 9, Gabriel Moreno. Number 8, Alejandro Kirk. Number 7, Francisco Alvarez. Number 6, Austin Wells. Number 5, Sean Murphy. Number 4, Patrick Bailey. Number 3, Adley Rutschman. Number 2, William Contreras. And number 1, Cal Raleigh. Honorable mentions, guys that I consider that didn't quite make the list. Believe it or not, my number 11 was Salvador Perez. I was so close to putting him on this list. Which, if you've listened to this show before, you know that I have been rather critical of him in the past, but he was good enough last year and improved on many of the things that I have not been a fan of his on previously, enough to where I almost put him on this list. Additionally, JT Realmuto, Jake Rogers, Yander Diaz, who was mentioned on Chris's list, and Ryan Jeffers.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine that was uh that was hard to choose from. Yeah, my
Mm-hmm.
number 10 was Gabriel Moreno, number 9 Alejandro Kirk, number 8 Will Smith, number 7 Yanner Diaz, number 6 Austin Wells, number 5 Sean Murphy, number 4 Adley Rutschman, number 3 Patrick Bailey, number 2 William Contreras, and number 1 Cal Raleigh. And yeah, I also considered Salvador Perez, but I think what detracted me from using him is, that year was last year was kind of random for him. He wasn't, um, he didn't have a consistent track record of success over the last 3 years. It was just mostly last year, and I guess his previous good year before that was 2021. But also much of his success from last year occurred early in the season, and then he kind of transformed back into his old self. I'm trying to find the
Yeah,
where he ranked among catchers in F4 from June 6th on, which is when he kind of, was brought back to earth a little bit. Because yeah, let's take a look at where he ranked. Because I want to explain, because I'm sure a lot of people do have him, would have him in the top 10 list. But yeah, he ranked 23rd in F4 among catchers from June 6th on last year. So I'm kind of going based more off of that, and also the fact that he's, heading into his age 35 season. So, youth is not necessarily on his side. And yeah, so I considered him. I considered Francisco Alvarez a bit as well. But yeah, that's our 10 through 1. That's our top 10 catchers. Those are our top 10 catchers in baseball.
yep.
So yeah, that does it for this installment of Above Replacement Radio. We